Oh, my lovely, 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 lovely students. Let's get started with our geography vocabulary lesson. Oh, it is so delicious.
Myrtle Beach days. We'll have some fun in the waves. I don't care what the West Coast says, 'cause I love those Myrtle Beach days. Myrtle Beach days. We'll have some fun in the waves. I don't care what the West Coast says, 'cause I love those Myrtle Beach days. How I love Myrtle Beach days.
Okay, lovely students. Our first word is geography. Oh, sucky, sucky, sucky. Okay, now geography, as you see the definition, let's take a second to read the definition to ourselves. Okay, so you see basically that geography, we're talking about the landforms, the body of waters, descriptions of places and climate. Really, we're talking about the physical features of the earth. We need to know these physical features, and then we need to know how these physical features affect man and man's surroundings. And we're about to jump into that. Right now, all we're doing is working on our geographical terms and kind of get a good handle on these vocabulary words. And then we're going to jump right into it to see in our early settlement of South Carolina, how did these people, our native people, and then our Europeans, and then our Africans, how did they interact with the geographical features of South Carolina? Okay, now let's move to our second word, latitude. Oh, what a delicious word, latitude. Now, as you see, I have on here our lat lines, as you can see from the visual, runs west to east. You see right there, the lat line is running west to east, right there at 0 degrees. That's the equator right there at 0 degrees. Yet it measures north or south of the equator. So what that means, lovely students, is that your lat line is always going to be a north or a south number. And your latitude, or lat as I call it, line is always going to be first. And how do I remember when I'm doing absolute location and my lat line I know has to be first? Because the A in lat is always first. Ooh, suck it, suck it, suck it. Just uh, a little memory device to help me remember that lat is always first. Again, my lat line is going to run east to west. I see it right here at 0 degrees. Equator is running west to east, but it's measuring north of the equator or south of the equator. Okay. Okay, lovely students. Here we are at our third vocabulary word, longitude. Longitude. Now, if you look at the picture, you will see that our longitude line is running north to south. See that 0 degrees prime meridian? That is my longitude line. It is running north to south, yet it measures east or west of the prime meridian. That is why on my absolute locations, my longitude number is always an east or west number. My longitude line is running, the line itself is running from north to south, yet it measures the lines that are east or west of the prime meridian. And my prime meridian line is always my 0 degrees line. You see it right there in the picture. Yeah, I didn't review the absolute location on the previous slide with the longitude, but we know that absolute location is exactly where a place is located on the map using my degrees. In other words, using my latitude and longitude line. And as you can see, lovely students, I have given us a map here. The red line is showing my equator line. That's 0 degrees. 0 degrees that is running west to east is my equator line, and that's in red. And my green line right here is my prime meridian line. My prime meridian line is 0 degrees running north to south. Now, we said previously that my lat line runs west to east, but it measures north of north of the equator line or south of the equator line. Okay, so now to find South Carolina on my line, first of all, I see Florida because Florida has that peninsula and it kind of dips out. So I see Florida and I see Cuba. Cuba's that little island that's 90 miles south of Florida. You see how I'm using relative location to find this absolute location? So I go up here right up at 30 degrees. Well, right at 30 degrees is Florida. Well, I know that South Carolina is above Florida. So I go up. Now, I have put the example on there, 35 degrees, 15 minutes north, and then 75 degrees, 30 degrees west. So if I just come up about 5 more degrees above this 30 degrees and come over, now you see we're 90 degrees up here, 90 degrees west. Now remember, my longitude line is running north to south. That's that green line right here. Remember, I highlighted the prime meridian line in green. That represents my longitude line. But my longitude measures west of the prime meridian or east of the prime meridian. Well, South Carolina is west of this prime meridian. So if I go up 35 degrees north and I come over 75 degrees west, you see I just started at 150 degrees, then I went to 120 degrees west, then I went to 90 degrees west. Well, I'm still not over to South Carolina. If I come over to 60 degrees west, well, I've passed South Carolina. If I come right over here, come back over a little bit to 75 degrees, I'm right there at South Carolina. So the absolute location of South Carolina is 35 degrees, 15 minutes north, 75 degrees, 30 minutes west. Now, in our teaching of absolute location, we really just focus in on the degrees and not necessarily the minutes or the seconds. On a map will show it to the precise location using minutes and then seconds on there. And I don't get into that. I don't teach you that precision, that exact precision. Now, if you and I were out on the ocean or out on the lake and we were using longitude and latitude to determine our location, yes, that would be necessary for us to know exact with such precision. But for our purposes of absolute location of our study on this map, we just stay within the degrees area. So that, my dear lovely students, is absolute location. Okay, lovely students, here we are at relative location. Now, relative location, what word do I really see? Relative. Well, relative, if I take out the IVE and add in what? ATION, I will get the word, and SHIP, I will get the word relationship. So relay, we're talking about relating to something. So relative location, how do I relate to relative location? Well, if I know the place of one place, I can figure out where it is in relation to another place. For example, here's a map right here. If I know that the location, if I can find the location of North Carolina, I know that North Carolina is north of South Carolina. And also, like if I can find Georgia, then I know that Georgia is, South Carolina is to the right of Georgia. See how that works? I know one place, I can figure out the location of another place if I know the location of one place. So I knew the location of North Carolina. I know it. And so then if I know the location of North Carolina, then I can figure out the location of South Carolina. Now, our next word number 6, is environment. Ooh, sucky. Environment is our surroundings. And you see, our environment, we can be surrounded by oceans, we can be surrounded by desert. Our surroundings can take delicious different details. And in South Carolina, we don't have a desert, but we definitely have different environments. The environment of the low country, when you go to Charleston or Myrtle Beach or Beaufort, it's definitely different than from our location. Well, first place, we don't have the natural land, the natural form of an ocean in our location. Our location, we have lakes, we have rivers. So we do have water, but it's just in a different format. And the ocean, being away from the ocean, our vegetation takes on a different type of look and feel to it. So our environments are our surroundings. Region. Oh, region. Now, I've given you a visual of regions, two different visuals of region. The first region you see is the United States. And you see the United States is just divided into really 4 regions. The eastern region, or the eastern seaboard region, that's where we live. Another name for our eastern region is the Atlantic seaboard, because we're on the Atlantic Ocean. Then you have the southern region, then you have the central region, and then you have out the west, the western region. And they just really kind of divided up according to where they're located on the United States map. Then over here in South Carolina, I gave you, and I did this for all our sports fans. I thought y'all would like seeing this. This is a region map of our high school regions. And as you can see, Edgefield County, we're in the Midland region. And you see that we don't normally divide up our southeast, southeast, we usually call that what, the low country, don't we? And then the northeast region is usually kind of blended in when we talk about our geographical regions with the Midlands. But see, this map right here is showing they've kind of divided it up a little bit differently to showing our high school regions. And then our next word is flora. That's just our vegetation. Now, the first picture kind of shows vegetation like what we see. in our area. Pine trees, creeks, really green vegetation. And the next picture really shows vegetations that we see around the coastal area, the palmetto trees and lots and more, but sandy soil. And sandy soil doesn't necessarily, a lot of the vegetation that grows in our area with that good dark soil, good rich soil, doesn't necessarily, the same vegetation wouldn't necessarily grow in our soil that would grow down in the low country in the sandy soil. In other words, you don't grow peaches down in the low country because the peach trees just doesn't work well with that sandy soil, but the palmetto tree does. Ooh, sucky. Okay, here we come with our word that was a little difficult for me, a little challenging for me. Fauna. Fauna. Fauna is just simply the animal life. And I have a picture of a deer, and this is for all our deer hunters. In our area, we see lots of deer. In my house, I have a little family, a deer family, and they've gotten so accustomed to me, lovely students, that when I drive up in my yard, if they're outside grazing behind my porch, they don't even pay attention to me. They just keep on grazing. I've listed up here, I put up here a picture of our South Carolina state animals. And again, and from this picture, we have a lot of turkey, wild turkey in our Edgewood County area. Elevation, this is just our height above sea level. The Sassafras Mountain is our highest point of elevation in South Carolina. And we'll be talking more about the Sassafras Mountain in later on. Down here at the bottom, you see the exact location of our Sassafras Mountains here in South Carolina. That's just an example of absolute location. We've already talked about that word, absolute location. And I just wanted to point that out to you that it's there, right there below the picture of the Sassafras Mountain. Now we come to precipitation, not perception. Thank y'all so much, my lovely students, for finding my boo-boo and then correcting it for me. Oh, I just appreciate y'all. Okay, precipitation. That's just the rain, the snow, the sleet, and the hail. In other words, precipitation has to do with the water coming down from the skies. And that water can be in different forms. I just put over here a visual of a study that was done from 1981 to 2010 of the November precipitations. Did I say that right, my lovely students? Precipitations, gotcha now, thank you, that the Department of Natural Resources did. And if you go to Edgefield County, you look right there, Edgefield County is in the blue area. And so from that time period in November, we had between 3 to 4 inches of rain or precipitation. Now, that doesn't necessarily just mean rain, doesn't it? It means we could have had some snow or sleet. Um, I wouldn't think that we would have hail in the winter. Hail usually comes in the more when it's drier weather, but that precipitation could definitely include snow, sleet. You have sleet when it's cold. We don't ever have sleet when it's hot, weather is hot, and you have rain, obviously. You have rain year round. Also, did you notice how it was interesting how the different regions of South Carolina had different rainfalls? I thought that was very interesting. I thought it was really interesting that up here at the very top, up here in the very top of the state, we're in the Blue Ridge mountainous area, how we had the most rainfall there. I wonder why, Steve. I wonder why it was there we had the most rainfall. That's very interesting to me. Okay, and now here's this mononach. this was a new word for us. I don't think any of us had heard this word before. Again, this is just, and that's good. That's what school is all about, my lovely students. We come here to learn. We don't need to know everything before we get to the room 284, do we? That's why we're coming to school. We're coming to learn. And this was something new for Miss Mosley, too. This is just that granite outcropping. And again, this is just forming from the Earth's crust from billions and billions of years ago. And so Table Rock is just a lovely example of this. And then I also just put the side of the mountain too, so you could just see all that granite there that was just formed by nature. So when we think of Monadnock, we can think of Table Rock. And we'll be talking more about Table Rock in the days ahead. Okay, here we go with word number 13, kudzu. Oh my gosh. I can remember my dad telling me stories about kudzu. He remembers when the state agricultural officials brought kudzu from Japan in the 1930s. He remembers it in McCormick County, them bringing it in the 30s during the Great Depression because farmers had used the soil so much. They had such soil erosion in South Carolina. And the agricultural leaders thought that this vine from Japan would help replenish the soil. And it did that, but then it also took over the soil. If you this first picture here, you see it. It looks like a monster where the kudzu has just taken over the light pole and the wiring. And then this house right here, off from Greenwood County. I remember going to visit kinfolks in McCormick County, and this was a common sight where someone wasn't living in a house anymore and how the kudzu had just taken it over. And it's hard to kill it. You have to keep poisoning it and poisoning it if you want to get rid of it. You can, but it is a nuisance, that's for sure. Now, our word number 14 is tributary. Tributary is just a small creek or a stream off of a main river. And the example that I've given us is one that we're very familiar with is the Savannah River. You see it in the first picture, it's in blue, that's the Savannah River. And you see in the light yellow all the areas of where the tributaries of the Savannah River flow out to. And then in this next picture, you really do see it extremely well, all these little tributaries. And I just picked one from Edgefield County, one that we're familiar with. That's Stevens Creek. It's located in the west side of Edgefield County, and it's just a tributary of the Savannah River. Now, this same creek flows through Columbia County, and a lot of times when we have lots of rain and the Savannah River rises and there's flooding, you'll see that flood waters off so if the river is flooding, so are the creeks. And you know how Stevens Creek Road over there off of Washington Road, when the Savannah River starts flooding, then Stevens Creek floods, and a lot of that flood water just flows on to that Stevens Creek Road. And a lot of times in Augusta, there'll be news, out there. The news reporters will be telling you to be careful when you're on Stevens Creek Road because of the flooding. Well, guess what, lovely students? It all comes back to this vocabulary word of tributary. It is simply a tributary of the Savannah Riverside. See how history is just all around us, and it's just so delicious. Okay, vocabulary word 15, fall line. Oh, suck it, suck it, suck it. Fall line, students. Now, there is no particular line per se. You're not going to go in Columbia. The fall line, as you see in this historic map, we're really on the fall line. And you definitely, when you're over in Columbia and the rivers there at the over especially like the Saluda River in Colombia, you really do see the rapids and the rocks in the rivers. But the fall line, this is really that imaginary line that's really a transition from the up country to the low country. And you always have those rapids and those rocks in your rivers. In other words, the Saluda River in Colombia is you couldn't put necessarily, there are parts of it that you can get in your kayak and you can have a good time in, but you can't put a boat in there and use that river for transportation purposes because it has all the rapids and the rocks. And so you can't you can't go a boat ride on the Saluda River. Now you can put your kayak in and play with your kayak in the river, but not a boat. Same thing with the Savannah River, parts of the Savannah River. We're on the fall line, and so is Augusta, Georgia. The Savannah River that is from Augusta on up is rapids. In other words, the part of the river from the city of Augusta all the way up to the lake is full of rocks and rapids, and you don't have any boats on it. But below Augusta, once you start coming below Beach Island, you can put in a boat. I'm talking about like a big boat. You can put a boat in below the city of Augusta, right across the river from around Beach Island, South Carolina. You could get in that boat and you could go down the Savannah River down to Savannah, Georgia, on out to the Atlantic Ocean. Make sense? The fall line is where that kind of that pardon me, pardon me, students, is that imaginary line where we're having a transition from uplands to lowlands. And the characteristic of this transition is rapids and rocks in the rivers. And you cannot navigate a river that has rocks and rapids in it. And I just also gave you another visual of the fall line, the showing how it affects Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama, and really on up into Maine. Okay, Carolina Bays. Oh, sucky, sucky, sucky. Now, this is very interesting that the Carolina Bays, this is just kind of that oval shaped land forms that is when we say depressed, it means it's sunk into the ground. And this was something that leaders in South Carolina did not know about until the 1930s with the advent of aerial photography. Now, photography was around a little bit before the 1930s, but people, and then when we say aerial, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about taking a picture from the skies. You've gone on up, you've got in an airplane, and you've gone up and you've taken pictures from the sky. So when you see that word aerial, you know you're talking about from the sky. So when folks started going up in the 1930s, that was the first time they did it, and they took pictures of South Carolina. Ooh, suck it! They saw all these bays. Particularly, we see them in the Low Country, and there is one in Aiken County. You can believe that. So they are farther north than what we would think them than them just being in the Low Country. Okay, student, number 17, fault. Now, this is just a fault. Is just a crack or fracture in the Earth's crust. And as you see, we have many fault lines in South Carolina. In Edgefield County, if you go right up here and you see Edgefield County, you'll see that red line, which stands for a map fault, and then you will see the purple dotted lines, which is an infer fault. Inferred means that it could possibly happen. Map fault means that they have mapped out that fault line, that line is there. And we know that it is there because we had one several years ago in Edgefield County, didn't we? Now we've seen that so a fault line is basically an area where you could have an earthquake. And so we've had an earthquake before in Edgefield. I want to say we had it maybe about 3 to 4 years ago, but we most definitely had it. And the epicenter was out there on the west side of town, which that kind of makes sense to us too, doesn't it, students? Because on the west of the county is near the Savannah River, and we know that that Savannah River is right on, again, it's a part of our fall line, which we have that transition from low country to high country, and we also know where you kind of have that transition area that you're going to have the fault of the fractures of the Earth's crust. So that makes sense to us. Okay, and you see also on the second picture where I gave just showing us South Carolina earthquake hazardous regions, and even though and you see where we are in that uh, Piedmont Blue Ridge area, and we saw that they had an earthquake there in 1913, and now we've had one in Edgefield County, and then you saw that they had one in Charleston in 1836. So we've had our little fair shares of earthquakes in South Carolina. Our next word, number 18, is delta. Delta is a vocabulary word that I just associate with two places. One, in the Mississippi Delta in Mississippi, and then the other way I associate it with is in Egypt, in the Nile River Delta area. And basically, a delta is just where the rivers are flowing out into the ocean. Now, in South Carolina, we don't necessarily have any big deltas that we really celebrate, like the Mississippi River in Mississippi or the Nile River in Egypt. But nevertheless, we do have deltas. As you can see, our own local Savannah River, it flows out into the Atlantic Ocean here in the city of Savannah, Georgia. Also, you see down here our other rivers. They're just flowing out into the Atlantic Ocean. So we do have that delta uh, landform in South Carolina. It's just not to the scale that you would see in Mississippi or in Egypt. It's just the landform itself, the delta itself, is just on a smaller scale. Lovely students, word number 19, sound. Sound. Now, we're not talking about music here. We're talking about the ocean, the sea, reaching around an island. And the example that I gave you right here is Port Royal Sound. Port Royal is located below Beaufort, South Carolina. You see right here on the map, it's between Hilton Head Island and Fripp Island. You see Port Royal. We'll be talking about Port Royal later on in our early settlement unit because it was an early area of settlement. Port Royal I just associate with Beaufort is in the Beaufort area, a little bit below Beaufort, and you just see how the water just comes up and how it's just working itself around Paris Island right here. We know Paris Island where all our Marines go in the United States for their training. Also, our next word and our last word is a barrier island. Now, that is an island that is off of the mainland, and it's an island that really it operates as a barrier to protect the mainland. And you see right here, Fripp Island, again, I'm on the Beaufort area. Hilton Head is a barrier island. Fripp Island right here is a barrier island. Um, Turtle Island is a barrier island. Defusky is a barrier island. These are all in the Beaufort area. Now, the picture below us are barrier islands in the Charleston area. Kiowa Island, Folly Island. Some of y'all Go out to Folly Island, to the beach, Sullivan's Island. I love going out to Sullivan's Island and to the Isle of Palms. That's where I go a lot of times. And those islands are off Charleston, and they're barrier islands. When during hurricane season, these are the islands that are usually hit the hardest because the hurricane are coming to them first before it goes to the mainland. So a barrier island is just an island off the mainland that protects the mainland from the sea, the dangers of the sea. They're lovely. Barrier Islands are lovely. And back in the day, Barrier Islands, cotton was grown on Barrier Islands, particularly like over at Sullivan's Island. So back in the day, before people started going there to vacation and hotels were being built, these barrier islands were used for agricultural purposes, and some of them weren't used at all. They were just there, and they were had no people didn't use them at all. They didn't really start booming per se until after really World War II, when people started buying up the land, and businesses started buying up land, putting hotels on them, and people started going out to them for the summer recreation. Lovely, lovely students. That is all 20 of our vocabulary terms on geography. Oh my goodness, y'all have done such a lovely, lovely job with filling out your graphic organizers. Oh, I'm so proud of you. Lovely students, what have we learned about South Carolina geography? Well, one thing that I hope you've seen is that our geography of our state has a variety to it. We just don't live in one particular or have one geographical feature that describes our state. We have lots of geographical features that describe our state. I also hope that some of these new terms that you have uh, taken hold to these new words and continue to practice the pronunciation. I know I will. Continue to summarize their definitions and continue to put the definitions in your own words and know how to use these words in sentences so that as you work on your writing in my class and in other classes, perhaps some of these new vocabulary terms and some of these old friend vocabulary terms, you will be able to incorporate them into your writing. Oh, that is so delicious. Lovely students, I just appreciate you. I appreciate your engagement with this vocabulary lesson. We will continue to come back to these vocabulary terms. We're not going to leave them as we move forward with our unit on early settlements. We'll come back to these terms to make sure that we really have them and have a complete and deep understanding of our geographic features of South Carolina. And again, thank you, my lovely students, for being so engaged and just really giving your best effort with this vocabulary.